All right, great. Looks like we're live. Um, Good evening, everybody. For those of us who were here with us last time, welcome back. And for those of you joining us for the first time, welcome to Skills for Solidarity. We're delighted that you're here. My name is Kelly Dowdell, and I'm a campaign manager at Leadnow. I'm filling in for Anna, who unfortunately broke her collarbone on Saturday and is out on sick leave this week. So Amara, who is hanging out behind the scenes right now, has asked me to tell you that if you wanted to send any good vibes and get well messages to Anna, you can do them through our Skills for Solidarity inbox, Skills for Solidarity at Leadnow.ca, and we'll compile them and make sure we get them to Anna once she's back with us. So I'm really excited tonight to hear from our panelists. They'll be exploring questions to keep asking ourselves as we engage in the work of renewing our relationship and discussing opportunities for making connections with other campaigns and organizations that are doing this important work. Our previous panelists laid out some really great context, and hopefully many of you have joined us for some of those panels. If not, they're available on our website for you to view once we're done here tonight. And now we're ready to start thinking about what it looks like to move forward. So tonight our panelists are Indigenous scholar Dr. Lynn Gehl, Jessica Bolduc from 4Rs, Crystal Layman, Climate and Energy Campaigner with Sierra Club Canada, and Clayton Thomas-Muller, who works with Island No More and 350.org. So the format will be similar to previous panels. Each panelist will speak for 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll jump into a Q&A. Throughout the panel, you can tweet your questions with the hashtag #SkillsForSolidarity, the number 4, so skills4solidarity, or email them to us at skillsforsolidarity@leadnow.ca. And that email address, we spell out the word for, so skillsforsolidarity@leadnow.ca. This information is also displayed on the site there, and we've got Rodrigo, Maggie, and Amara here from the Leadnow team ready to receive your questions, and Santa making sure that all our tech runs smoothly. So thanks for the backup, all of you. That's great. We'll jump right in and get going. So we'll begin with Lynn Gehl. Lynn is an Algonquin Anishinaabe Kwe from the Ottawa River Valley of Ontario. She describes herself as a learner, researcher, thinker, writer, blackface blogger, and she has been an Indigenous human rights advocate for over 25 years. Lynn works to eliminate the continued sex discrimination in the Indian Act, and she is also an outspoken critic of the contemporary land claims and self-government process. She has a doctorate in Indigenous Studies, a Master of Arts in Canadian and Native Studies, and an undergraduate degree in anthropology. She also has a diploma in chemical technology and worked in the field of environmental science for 12 years in the area of toxic organic analysis of Ontario's waterways. While advocating for change is currently part of what she does, she's also interested in traditional knowledge systems that guide the Anishinaabe forward to a good life. You can see her work, which includes over 75 journal, community, and video publications, as well as 3 books, one which was just recently published, at www.lynngehl.com, Lynn, Lynngehl.com. Welcome, Lynn.
Hi, Kwe. Makna Dodan Pikwakanagan Indinjaba, Peterborough Megwantira, Gizigate Tamenjo Kwe Indigenous cause, and Da Shaganashi knows when Lynn Gehl. Hi, thank you for having me. I have to say thanks to the Leadnow team for inviting me today, and thanks to Anna. I have to also thank and acknowledge the Mississauga Anishinaabe people of this area of Peterborough, Ontario, where I'm presently based. So where do we go from here? I think that's the theme, right? Where do we go from here? So I think it's a great theme. So I have 4 things that I want to talk about. I like the number 4 because, you know, there's 4 sacred directions, 4 levels of creation. So the first thing I want to talk about is allyship, Indigenous knowledge, follow the turtle, and then I wanted to talk about the Algonquin of the Ottawa River Valley. So my experience with reflecting on allyship, it comes from my experience in the land claim and self-government process here in Ontario. And I think a lot of people have seen my Ally Bill of Responsibilities. It's more of a guide. It is a guide to get people to critically think about their responsibilities as an ally. So I just want to talk briefly about a few of those points that I think are important. The first one is that I think is really important is that allies need to be fully grounded in their own ancestral history and culture, because we don't want allies to be like us. We want them to be who they are, fully grounded. We don't want them to be vulnerable or needful in the role that they take on. So that's really important. I think also as allies need to really think about that any movement forward that they may be participating in, it has to meet the needs of the most oppressed. So it has to meet the needs of women, children, the elderly, young teenage girls and boys, and the disabled. So we need to make sure that any movement that we're involved in or allies are involved in, that it serves the most oppressed. Otherwise, it could be a movement that is fortifying structural oppression. Another thing I think is really important that allies need to think about is they really need to think concretely about lateral violence and make sure that they're not engaging in the activities that make it worse. And another thing is the allies need to really think critically about the leader or the group of leaders that they're standing behind. They need to think critically about it and make sure that that it's not a questionable movement forward. And they need to value that sometimes allies are manipulatively chosen for a leader's agenda. Another thing I think is really important about allyship, and it comes from a blog I wrote, two things genuine allies know. I think it's really important that we recognize and value the differences between people versus ask that we erase them. So for example, what I mean by that is oftentimes you'll be involved in a solidarity movement, and people who are more oppressed will be talking about things that they're faced with, and people who are less oppressed will oftentimes try to erase that, and that's really problematic because it is people who are most oppressed, who are under many layers of oppression. They have really important knowledge that people who are more privileged don't have. I think also allies need to understand that structural oppression and the effects of structural oppression in terms of the exhausting energy that it takes. So people who are under many layers of structural oppression, they're going to be they're going to be tired, they're going to be exhausted, they're going to be easily frustrated because a lot of their intrapsychic energy has to go toward moving through the structures of society. So that's really allies need to really understand that about people who are under layers of structural oppression. Another blog I wrote was called "A Colonized Ally Meets a Decolonized Ally," and this is what they learn. And I think there's just a few points there that I would like to stress. And the first one is that a colonized ally makes assumptions about the process, whereas a decolonized ally values that there may be principles in the process that they're not aware of. And a colonized ally wants to know more, wants knowledge now, whereas a decolonized values that they have their own relationship with the knowledge and they have work to do, that knowledge is not a commodity that's given to them, that the most important knowledge will come from their own thinking and their own reflecting. I think also a colonized ally, oftentimes they'll equate their money and their hard work on the land as meaning land ownership, whereas a decolonized ally knows that land ownership is more about social hierarchy and privilege. So, for example, when Canada was bringing in settlers, they gave the settlers 100 acres of free land grants, but the Algonquins were entitled to it. And then there's the issue of projection and guilt. You know, actually projection and emotion. So a colonized ally will project guilt and project their emotion, but the decolonized ally knows that people who are under layers of structural oppression, they have enough to deal with, and they don't need to carry on settler guilt, deal with settler guilt or settler emotions. And a colonized ally appropriates another nation's indigenous knowledge, where a decolonized ally does the hard work to uncover their own indigenous knowledge. And that's a great segue to talk about. The second thing I wanted to talk about was the my Indigenous Knowledge Protection Act, which is again just a guide to get people to think critically about indigenous knowledge and who has it and where is it. A lot of people don't realize that everyone has indigenous knowledge. We're all indigenous to the earth, and everyone has it. And it doesn't just reside with humans. So what I did is I took the time to define it as I understand it. And a lot of people don't quite understand this one when I say indigenous knowledge predates human arrival. What I mean by that is trees have knowledge, and water has knowledge, and the land has knowledge. Knowledge doesn't exist in human consciousness. That's very anthropomorphic, and we need to value that all the animals and all the beings have knowledge. Having said that, humans do make their own indigenous knowledge, and there's ritualistic and oral and written elements to it. What's really important there is that indigenous knowledge is not just in the mind, it's in the practices we do and in the rituals we do. And indigenous knowledge is local, so it emerges from the relationship between the land and the greater cosmos, so that's really important. And indigenous knowledge sits closer to natural law, and that's why it's often said that women do the most important knowledge, because they're closer to natural law in the work that they do, whereas men have stepped a few steps outside of it. And that's really important that's why we value and respect the work that women do, because they are closer to natural law. And it's inclusive of and inherent of a moral code. So, for example, the economic model that we're all working under now, it has no moral code, and of course, I would say that's a false economy. It lacks a moral code. So, those are some elements of indigenous knowledge to get people to think critically about it. And I think we all need to move into this indigenous knowledge. We need to have an indigenous knowledge paradigm shift where everybody goes back to their indigenous knowledge, and teachers have a role in that. And the first thing that teachers really need to do is they need to start with their own indigenous knowledge and get students to start with their indigenous knowledge. And we all have it, not just some people, not just the indigenous people of Turtle Island. We all have indigenous knowledge, and it predates the scientific model. It predates patriarchy, predates industrialization and materialism, and the present economic paradigm. So it's there. We just need to all do our work to go back to it. The third thing I wanted to talk about was clearing the path of the turtle, which is basically a metaphor I use called, it's really follow the turtle. And what I'm getting at there is that in any movement forward, we need to put the people who are most oppressed at the front of the line, and we need to let them lead the way forward. And that's really important because, well, first of all, you're not going to get the momentum needed, because a lot of, for example, myself as an Indigenous woman, I'm not going to be part of a movement where only the needs of white men and women are addressed, because the moment they get what they want, my needs are dropped. And so that becomes a barrier in the momentum and the movement forward. So that's why I say the most oppressed has to be leading the way. We need to follow the turtle. And in that process, we need to value equity versus equality. So it may take extra effort to bring in Indigenous women and bring in persons with disabilities, but we need to take that extra effort to bring them in and include them in the process. And we need to value that people who are under many layers of structural oppression, such as racism, sexism, and ableism, that there's interaction effects between those layers of structural oppression. And it's like a drug. The three layers are not additive. It's more exponential. There's an interaction effect, and so that's really important. And we need to stand behind the people who are in front. And some people get really offended by that idea of standing behind. They say, well, are we not equals? Can we not stand beside one another? And my response to that is, well, no, because I need people to stand behind me, to push me forward, and then once we're equal, once we're equal, then we can stand beside one another. But right now, people with more privilege, when they say, well, "Are we not equal?" Well, we're not. At a practical level, we're not equal. I think theoretically, that's a great idea, but that's the goal, that we all be equal. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was the issue of colonial capitalism and the Algonquin land claim and self-government process. We've heard a lot of people talk about how any movement forward has to be centered on Indigenous rights, and they need to lead the way. They need to be the foundation, because in what Harper's doing is Indigenous rights are the main barrier to the present economic order and destruction of the earth. And so when I think about that idea that Indigenous people's rights are the main barrier behind it, I think about the Algonquins of Ontario. A lot of people don't realize that the Algonquins of Ontario are pretty much close to ratifying and terminating their land-related rights. A lot of people don't know that the Algonquins straddle Ontario, Quebec, and when we go to, which is interesting, but when you see movements and people are talking on the Parliament Hill, they always refer to it as unceded Algonquin territory, but the analysis never goes beyond that. Nobody's really looking at what is the main structural oppression that is being imposed on that land that Canada's Parliament buildings reside on, and that is the Algonquin land claim and self-government process. No one's talking about it. Nobody's making the invisible visible, and it's really quite disturbing, because the offer that the Algonquins of Ontario have been given is only $300 million and 1.3% of our land. And what I find really frustrating for me as an Algonquin woman is that whenever there are rallies to the Hill, or whenever there's events that's talking about the Algonquins, the issue that the Algonquins are presently engaging in seems to be ignored or pushed aside. More people are talking about the effects of what's happening in Quebec. And of course what's happening in Quebec to the Algonquin people is horrible, but no one is talking about the main stress on the land under Canada's Parliament building, and that being the Algonquins of Ontario are about to terminate their land rights. And there's a lot of people speaking out about it, but their voices have been invisible. So that's what I wanted to say. Miigwech.
Great. Thank you, Lynn. That provided, I think, an excellent kickoff with 4 really solid points for us to sort of organize our thinking around these important topics around allyship and protecting Indigenous knowledge. I really also appreciated the metaphor of clearing the path for the turtle. I think that's something that is easy for us to keep in mind and hold in our minds and in our hearts as we do this work. So thank you for that. Next up is Jessica Bolduc. She holds an honors Bachelor of Arts degree from Carleton University in economics and has been working in community economic development in Northern Ontario for the last 5 years. She's worked directly on projects relating to local food, economic development, and capacity building for First Nations communities. She's also a board member and the National Youth Representative for the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples, a national Aboriginal organization that advocates for urban off-reserve Aboriginal people in Canada. Jessica is currently working as project coordinator for the 4Rs Youth Movement. This is a collaboration between 5 national youth-serving organizations, 6 national Aboriginal organizations, and 3 national charitable foundations in Canada. Together, they create opportunities for Indigenous and non-Indigenous young people to come together, and through dialogue and learning, and to change, with the goal of changing the social, economic, and other outcomes for the next 7 generations. Jessica joins us from her community in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, where she's an active leader creating many diverse opportunities for young people to make change through arts, culture, and collaboration for social justice. So welcome, Jessica.
Hi, thank you, Kelly. Ani Boozhoo, Jessica Nadijnakas, Bawadi Nadonjaba. Hello, I'm here. I find myself in Sault Ste. Marie in Northern Ontario, and that is in Anishinaabe territory, Ojibwe territory. I'm just really humbled to be here with these other panelists, and thank you, Lynn, for the really important points that you were making, in particular about thinking about what we aren't talking about. I'd like to today to speak to you about the project, the 4 Hours Youth Movement, and really about how we hope to continue solidarity and reconciliation work in this country with young people, and maybe speak to you a little bit about my story and about how I'm continuing to do work also myself to become a better ally. As Lynn said in her opening comments there, 4 is a really important number in Indigenous culture, and for us, for the 4 Hours Youth Movement, we're really looking at 4 pillars that are respect, reciprocity, reconciliation, and oh wow, I've forgotten the 4th. Reciprocity, respect, relevance, and reconciliation. So I want to kind of, before I start off with where we're going now, I want to just go back to 2012, and that's when this idea of the 4 Hours Youth Movement really started. In 2012, the CEOs of YMCA Canada, YWCA Canada, Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada, and Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Canada, and Pathways to Education approached the Assembly of First Nations to work together on improving services for Indigenous youth. So I'll stop there for a moment for us to ask the question, who else should be in that room? Hopefully by now in your journey you've learned that Indigenous culture is really diverse. So the Assembly of First Nations represents over 600 First Nation bands recognized across Canada, speaking over 60 languages. But when I say Indigenous, I also mean the Métis, who are almost 500,000 strong, and the Inuit to the north, who have a registered population of about 60,000 people. So each of these have regional dialects and distinct cultural traditions. So in addition to those, there's a significant off-reserve and non-status population. So it was really important that at this point when AFN was approached by these organizations, that they thought about who isn't in the room. So they brought together the rest of the partners on this project. So Métis National Council, the National Association of Friendship Centres, the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples, the Native Women's Association of Canada, and Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami. And that was a good start. But then I think we need to ask ourselves, if we're wanting to do work with youth, we need to have them at the table too as well. So the next step in that process was really reaching out to the networks and identifying some young leaders who could contribute to that conversation. And I'm really glad they did, because that's how I got involved through the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples, which is an organization that represents off-reserve, urban and rural, Inuit, Métis, First Nation, non-status Aboriginal people across Canada. So again, just kind of pointing out the fact that Canada's Indigenous people are quite diverse. So this is really where I started my journey, and it was a little over a year ago. I've lived off-reserve my whole life. I have a mixed background of Anishinaabe Kwe from Wawading, Batchewana First Nation, and also some Irish and French in me. Living off reserve, I really had not a big connection to my community, but over the last few years, I've been really looking into my colonized history and how, as an Anishinaabe person, I've been contributing to the perpetuation of that in my life and in others. So for me, this is the start of a journey to look at how I can decolonize, and I can move towards being, as Lynn had said, a decolonized ally. So what is it exactly that we're doing with 4 Hours? We started by gathering young people together to talk about that original question. How can we improve services to Aboriginal youth? But young people, when they came together, they kind of pushed back and they said, it's way bigger than that, and we can do better than that. So we thought to ourselves, but how? Do we need a national campaign? Do we need to be doing something across the country that brings forward this idea of 4 Rs? So we brought together more youth, 25 at first, and then we brought together over 130 this past spring at the TRC's national event in Edmonton. But really what we found when we brought young people together is that the change that we wanted to see in the country was happening right in front of us, and that was this opportunity for young people to meet each other, for Indigenous youth from the North to come and to tell their stories to non-Indigenous youth from Toronto and from Vancouver. And we had conversations about identity, about diversity, and about privilege, and what that really means, and what that means to each and every one of us. And that's really where the magic started to happen, I think. It was that one-on-one, and that's where we decided that it's really our turn to make history, right the wrongs, bring equality to young Indigenous people living in this country. And we made a statement of reconciliation together at the TRC event that really committed ourselves to this work. So where we are now is our mission is to change the country by changing the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth. So as young leaders, we've committed to working together, and we want to use dialogue and learning to bridge that gap in understanding about the true history of Canada's founding peoples and the colonization that occurred in this country, and to go from there to inspire Canada's young people to think about what a new vision for this country really can be and how we can work together to make that new country a reality. So our vision is to strengthen our identity and unity in our diversity. Together we can recreate a country where Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth can all live, thrive, and celebrate. And this is Deuce. So with all of that, where do we really want to end up? We want to change attitudes and we want to change hearts. It's not about giving people information. People can read up as much as they can on the internet about all of these different topics, but where we feel real change is going to happen is making those real connections, making friends with people, knowing people as an individual rather than a name or a statistic or a misconception. Where our ancestors were when they signed those treaties and they made those wampum belts, and incorporating Indigenous values into a future Canada. So how we're going to do this, we really want to focus on youth telling their stories, giving Indigenous youth the opportunity to become trainer facilitators so that they're ready to return home and train others, Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth, on cross-cultural dialogue and collaboration. How can we work together in solidarity as young people? We're developing a network of mobilized young people across the country who are ready to speak and act with one voice. We're supporting them in the development of solidarity projects through our national partners and at the grassroots. And we're making changes to programming throughout our partner network so that we can better service the needs of Indigenous youth. I want to acknowledge that up until this point, this work has been difficult. It's been challenging to work with all of these partner organizations to make sure that we're balancing the power dynamics between young leaders and adult allies, and making sure that it's the young leaders who are really pushing this process and ensuring that our adult allies are there to support us rather than lead us. And it's also really important that all voices are heard, so that we're recognizing our Inuit neighbors from the north, even if sometimes they can be quite far away, and also recognizing again, as I'll say, that diversity of Indigenous people, First Nations, Métis, non-status. It's been a very delicate balance to walk, I'll say. We need to really think deeply and hardly about respecting everyone's experiences. For example, how young people might respond to reconciliation. For a non-Indigenous youth, it might be an eye-opening experience. But as an Indigenous youth with experiencing intergenerational trauma from residential schools, that might be a very, very hard process for them, and we need to make sure that we're recognizing that. And sometimes for our non-Indigenous youth, it's a a tough subject when you bring up ideas of colonization and being settler Canadians. What does that mean to them, and how can we move forward knowing this and still be okay with that and building that relationship? But really what I've come to see in this work is that young people are ready. They're waking up all across this country and standing together to make change. And it's coming forward in small little projects at the grassroots, and it's just coming forward at the national level, and young people speaking up and things like we saw it in Idle No More, and we continue to see it in the work that's done at the local level. I just want to say hey to all the 4Rs, people who are out there listening, and to the folks that I've kind of come into contact through this past year who I know that want to do this type of work and are waiting for other young people to kind of stand up and do this work with them. So since this is really the start of my learning, I don't have a lot of advice to give people, but I'd like to invite you on my journey. As I said, myself personally, I'm really learning to be an ally myself, and we can laugh and we can cry and we can high five together. So I encourage everybody to think about that and join our Facebook group. That's the first thing that you can do. So a couple of things of advice, I guess, that I have been thinking about is, for those of you who are new to solidarity work, start with your personal journey and ripple out from there. Look within yourself and think about the things that you can be doing to be a better ally to Indigenous people. And for those of you who are already doing this work, think about deepening your relationships. Connect back with old friends. Look how you can turn one-time solidarity work into a lifetime relationship. And I was thinking about how's an epic way that I can close this out. This weekend I was really fortunate to be a part of a group of young people who were doing some brainstorming and some hacking to build a new foundation for Rideau Hall. And we were looking at, what is Canada going to look like for the next 150 years, thinking that in 2017 is the 150th anniversary of Canada. And for different people, that means different things, and especially for Indigenous people, many of whom, question that concept of Canadian identity. Something that we talked about in our assumptions when we were doing this work was to assume in the goodwill of others. And I'm looking at my computer, I have some post-it notes on here from some of the work that we were doing. And I had the privilege of working with a woman named Chris Archie, and somebody that now I've grown to really admire. And she said that, and she wrote that on a post-it here: assume in the goodwill of others. So I think that's what I'm going to leave with everyone, to do that. And I'm going to do that myself, because I think that we're all ready to work together in solidarity, and I'm looking forward to what we can make of this country. So thank you. Miigwech.
Thanks, Jess. That was great. That last sort of assuming the goodwill of others kind of gave me shivers. Wonderful. And congratulations on all the work that you're doing. Looks like really important stuff in terms of creating safe spaces for people to have those authentic conversations. Yeah, that's awesome. Great. Before we move on, just a quick reminder to everyone that you can tweet your questions with the hashtag #SkillsForSolidarity using the number 4, so skills number 4 solidarity, or email them to us at skillsforsolidarity@Leadnow.ca. And in the email address, we spell out the word for, FOR, so skillsforsolidarity@Leadnow.ca. We have some great questions, and I can't wait to get to the Q&A portion. But before we do, we still have 2 more awesome speakers on deck. Next up is Crystal Layman. Our exchange with Crystal is going to be a little bit more of a dialogue, but I'll go ahead and introduce her, and we'll jump into that piece. So Crystal feels it's her obligation as a mother to protect her land, water, and culture for her children and future generations. Currently, Crystal is the Climate and Energy Campaigner for Sierra Club Canada and is a fellow of the Indigenous Environmental Network. In addition to her 2 university degrees, Crystal uses her Indigenous ways of knowing and being to articulate the impacts of the direct exploitation of the tar sands, while addressing the environmental racism the Government of Canada imposes on First Nations people in the name of resource extraction. So Crystal is joining us from the Beaver Lake Cree Nation, which is on Treaty 6 territory here in Alberta, which is where I am. And although the Beaver Lake Cree's rights to hunt and fish for all time are enshrined in Treaty 6, their land is being usurped by the tar sands industry, which destroys the very habitat of the animals and fish they depend on. Alberta and Canada have far exceeded the land's capacity for development. They've recklessly authorized tar sands projects, military facilities, and other development without any real regard for the rights of Beaver Lake and other treaty nations. This means that the constitutionally protected rights of the Beaver Lake Cree to sustain themselves are being violated, and that's given the nation grounds to sue the federal and provincial governments, which they did in 2008. This court case is currently being carried forward by the Beaver Lake Cree's current leadership, and Crystal uses this as one example of how First Nations people can assert their rights while offering a solution. So Crystal's joining us to talk, as we know, where we go from here. And as I mentioned, it'll be a bit more of a dialogue format. So I'll start by asking you, Crystal, first of all, welcome, and ask you to speak candidly about what it's like to work in this movement and how privilege and class continues to show up and affect how we work together.
Okay. First of all, dansa. Yeah, Crystal Layman, Beaver Lake Cree. I kind of, started to think that maybe I would apologize before I started talking, but then I thought about it, and I think we're kind of at the point in this entire movement where we don't have time to apologize to each other anymore in relation to, hurting anybody's feelings. Or anything like that. So, I don't want anybody to walk away or to log off, because I might have said something that triggered you. I think in this work, doing environmental work, if we can say candidly and publicly that this work was never about the environment versus the economy, then I think that if we can make strong public statements like that to the other side, then I think that within our movement we should be able to speak openly and candidly as well. Please ask me for clarification if there's something that's not quite clear. So with that, I'm going to go into this question of where do we go from here. And I've decided to go about it this way because I've been having some really great conversations with some of the people, some key people in the movement that are, active and very public. And, in organizing a lot of these big events, we're always having to deal with issues, be it logistics or timing, whatever it is. But amongst those issues, we also deal with issues of class and privilege. We deal with issues around, even our rightful place within the movement. And so, when I was asked to sit on this panel, this idea of moving forward, so where do we go from here? Well, I kind of sat back and I said, well, we can't go anywhere until we deal with the current issues. So there's enough of this pushing things under the rug and hoping that they'll go away or solve themselves. So I think in order to have a truly honest, open dialogue and working in solidarity, we have to address those issues. And some of those things, as we unpack them, are really hard things to talk about. And unfortunately, these are issues that are not ours per se, but there's a historical foundation where these issues come from. And as the leaders moving forward, in this movement, as we move forward in this movement, we have to now fix what's been done, and that's Indigenous and non-Indigenous people alike. So Anna had asked me, unfortunately she's not able to be here, but she had asked me to talk about what it's like to work in this movement and how privilege and class continues to show up and affect how we work together. And so it brought me immediately to going into this big People's Climate March that's happening on Sunday in New York. And that immediately took me to the Forward on Climate rally that happened in Washington, D.C. last year. And then between the issues that we have to deal with in organizing, I was brought to the Cowboy and Indian Alliance that happened in Washington, D.C. in April of this year. And all three of those events involved everybody. So every single person, no matter your race, color, or creed, were welcome at these marches. But the issue that we have, I think, in we talk about rightful place, is that we are now at a time where we have no choice but to acknowledge the original people of the land that we stand on. And some people might not agree with that. That's totally fine, but that's truth. And that's one thing that in this movement we've got to start getting used to, is truth. And sometimes the truth is really hard to accept. And so the truth of the matter is that Indigenous peoples have been pushed to the side for far too long. And the truth of the matter is that Indigenous peoples have joined in solidarity, taking all of these pieces of a perfect solidarity puzzle. I've said it before. I could go on and on, the scientists, etc., etc. The only people that were missing from this perfect solidarity puzzle was Indigenous people. And Indigenous people have now joined the forces, and we've now, created this perfect solidarity puzzle. But in order for this perfect solidarity puzzle to shine, we have to deal with the issues in where do Indigenous people fit in this movement, and acknowledging the rightful place of the Indigenous peoples in this of these marches, and and it being negotiated on where the Indigenous people are going to stand in these marches. And I don't think that that's like me opening my home and somebody coming in and telling me how to run my home or where to stand in my home. And so I think that when we look at solidarity and we're trying to unpack these issues around solidarity and what that really honestly means, I look to the Cowboy and Indian Alliance and that encampment that happened in Washington, D.C. And it was the Indigenous people that were pushed to the forefront in that encampment. And that was the first time I can honestly say that I really honestly felt comfortable in an open space, where I really honestly felt like the original peoples of this land, this Turtle Island, looking beyond these invisible borders. That was the first time that we were really honestly acknowledged in these bigger marches. And so. But in saying that as well, I also, we talk about these invisible borders. I also see that there's, from the Canada to the U.S. side is drastically different, and that was a conversation that Anna and I had where we talked about, I have to acknowledge that, on the Canadian side, we are in at a point in this movement where everybody just gets it. You know, we're at that point. Not everybody, you know, but we are advancing very quick. And I can say that, you know, the different events that I go to across Canada, I always feel like the Indigenous peoples are being acknowledged. I think that that says a lot about where we're going from here, where we are currently. And I think that if we can continue on that path, then I think we're all going to be all right in relation to the health and longevity of this movement. So how do we move forward? And I think how do we move forward? So how do I get involved? So I think that, you know, the first thing we have to address is this word reconciliation, and that's a word that, you know, I feel is thrown around so quickly and so easily. And when we look at the English definition of reconciliation, it's restoration of friendly relations. So that, and I don't know, you know, how many people are online that know who he is. But he, at the time that I met him, was in the UK, and he was working on bringing a group of college students from the UK over to the Beaver Lake Cree, and our elders were talking about oral history and how they wished that, and they said this directly to him, how they wished that the students coming over could understand the Cree language, because history, we don't write knowledge and history down in books. So everything that we learn is learned through our language, and it's retained in, you know, in our minds and recalled. And so when the elders talk about oral history and how our language cannot be translated very well into the English language, so they talk about how something was lost when the attempt is made in translating. So we're going from a descriptive literal language to language that has many different ways of saying one thing. And there are things that will not translate very well. And so I'm not going to go further into what I'm, I guess, trying to say when I talk about this word reconciliation and it being restoring of friendly relations. Because our understanding in our oral history of this word reconciliation is a whole lot different. So it's up to you. The first thing you need to do is you need to go out there and you need to learn about the treaty territory you are in, to learn about the original people whose territory that you're in, and the history of the original people of this land, and the trials and tribulations we've endured and that we continue to endure. And the only way that you're going to learn that in a true and honest way is if you go directly to the people, the original people of those territories. So that's going to be your first step in creating true and honest solidarity. You know, for you to learn about us. So when we talk about solidarity, I think, and this goes to everybody in the movement, Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, we're always parading around yelling in solidarity. So I think that it's time that we prove it. It's time to prove it. Let's stop talking about solidarity and let's prove it. And part of that is addressing the issues of class and privilege. And that's something that we have to deal with in in things like organizing of marches and rallies and big events. As Indigenous people, we have to deal with the issues of class and privilege. And so I think I want to end, there with, this journey is about the self in moving forward. And so know what this means to you. Know where you come from. As non-Indigenous people to Turtle Island, you are Indigenous from somewhere. You have roots somewhere. And you need to go in your knowledge systems. And then you need to honor that. And then I think finally in saying, is that we are all treaty people. You're hearing a lot of discussion around inherent treaty rights. So I think as people, treaty is inherent, meaning it's forever. Thus, it's up to you as treaty people to ensure your government. And that's where, this idea of educating yourselves and, means when Indigenous people say your government, because we are a sovereign nation, we are a nation within a nation. And that's knowledge that's not to those of us, everybody, because even our own people don't know that. Some obligation to uphold the inherent rights of the original peoples of this land. So our inherent right to hunt, fish, trap, forage for all time, as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the rivers flow. And this is not up for negotiation. Ex-MAGA. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Crystal. So there were a couple of times where you cut out. I know we've had some challenges with your internet connection, but I appreciate you sticking through it. And for those of you following along at home, we are going to get these presentations transcribed for future use, and hopefully we'll be able to share that transcription with Crystal to help us fill in some of those blanks that we had when your signal dropped. But I appreciate, certainly, as we all do, your comments, and it sparked quite a bit of dialogue here on our Twitter feed and in our inbox. So I think we'll move on just so that we do have some good time left for questions and answers, Q&A, and we'll present our final panelist for this evening. Clayton Thomas-Muller is a member of the Treaty 6 based Matthias Column Cree Nation, also known as Pukatawagan. Did I get that right? Awesome, thank you. Located in northern Manitoba, Canada. Based in the Canadian capital city of Ottawa, Clayton is an organizer with 350.org, the co-director of the Indigenous Tar Sands campaign of the Polaris Institute, and a founder and organizer with Defenders of the Land. Clayton is involved in many initiatives to support the building of an inclusive movement globally for energy and climate justice. He serves on the boards of Black Mesa Water Coalition, the Global Justice Ecology Project, and the Bioneers. He is also a steering committee member of the Tar Sands Solution Network. Clayton has been recognized by Untni magazine as one of the top 30 under 30 activists in the United States and as a Climate Hero 2009 by Yes magazine. For the last 12 years, he's campaigned across Canada, Alaska, and the lower 48 states, organizing in hundreds of First Nations, Alaska Native, and Native American communities in support of grassroots Indigenous peoples to defend against the encroachment of the fossil fuel industry. This has included a special focus on the sprawling infrastructure of pipelines, refineries, and extraction associated with the Canadian tar sands. Clayton's an organizer, facilitator, public speaker, and writer on environmental and economic justice, and we are thrilled to have him with us. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. Is my audio okay? Okay, great. I'm really happy to have been invited to such an incredible group of people that are presenting on our fifth and final series that Leadnow has taken the leadership to organize. I think that these intersection points where our movements converge are a place where we really need to focus on, a place where our people come together and learn from one another. These are really important, spaces. I typically don't come to these kinds of spaces. I get a lot of invitations to, speak to predominantly non-native audiences about how not to be racist. And, quite frankly, I always take the perspective that when we're doing anti-oppression and anti-racism work, we got a lot of work to do in Indian country. Our own indigenous peoples, struggle daily with misogyny in our community, homophobia, with all the ways that we've internalized systems of oppression. We deal with those on a daily basis on an interpersonal level, and we deal with it in a kind of a systemic way as well, both through oppression by settler colonial state mechanisms of oppression by the Canadian government, the U.S. government, and within our own institutions that have been so significantly affected by colonialism and settler state colonial occupation. And I often tell people that I don't spend a lot of time trying to educate the white man about how not to be racist, how not to be that way, because that's the work of my brothers and sisters who identify in that way. It's kind of like if we asked a bunch of Indian residential school survivors to go to an Indian residential school healing workshop led by priests and nuns. They're going to have a real hard time going to where they need to go to deal with what they, with what they got to deal with. And it's the same thing with white supremacy, white patriarchy. They're going to have a real hard time going to where they need to go to confront their white privilege, especially if I'm leading them in that space as a strong Cree man from Pugatawagan. But that said, I do believe that we all have a fundamental obligation and responsibility to take care of our own communities, our people, our families, to make sure that they have the tools to be able to confront systems of oppression as they manifest, in our pathway, as we build our movements towards, some kind of whole. Some people call that whole reconciliation, but I struggle with even the word reconciliation these days. A lot of our aunties and uncles in Indigenous social movements, especially those that have been leading the incredibly emotional and heavy process of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that has been collecting the testimony of our residential school survivors. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, I guess, is what I wanted to point out. And just so before I begin, though, just to respect protocol, bonjour, danse, songe bene sia ne tishnakas, niga ne bene siga bo tishnakas, gnu totem. Just wanted to introduce my spirit name as well. I think that we're living in a really exciting time here in Canada, and the title of our space tonight is Where Do We Go? The title of our event tonight is Where Do We Go From Here? You've been exposed over the last 5 workshops to an incredible amount of knowledge and emotion and just good information about how to decolonize, about how to confront systems of oppression, about how to understand the place where you live and call home, and probably how to tie in and connect to local environmental justice struggles happening in your territory as an ally. And I think that, we're living in a time right now in Canada where there's such incredible polarity. In the last couple of years, with the explosion of Idle No More onto the scene, in our social media feeds, in the news, um, Indigenous peoples are truly rising up, I think in a very prophetic way. Many of our prophecies talk about this time. I know for our Cree people, we talk about the prophecy of the seventh generation, about a generation of young people that would be born free from the shackles of the colonial mind. And, and not that they would not be touched by oppression or colonization or occupation, but that they would be free from the shackles of the colonial mind. And that's very important because that's what's happening right now. And if you look at the demographics of Indigenous peoples here in this country of Canada, we've got, 30 million people, 2 million Indigenous peoples, 75% of our Inuit, Métis, and First Nations population are under the age of 30, 55% under the age of 25. And what we have right now is essentially a maturing group of our population that is about to step into the labor market, that is going to step into leadership of our political advocacy organizations like the Assembly of First Nations, our provincial organizations, like in my home territory, the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, or Manitoba Keewatin-Okimaganak Chiefs Organization. We've got doctors, lawyers, engineers, all maturing and stepping into power. And, we also happen to be the fastest rising labor demographic in the Canadian economy. And so, in a very short time, a large majority of workers in this country will be Indigenous. And so, from a prophecy perspective, what we're taught growing up, if you're Cree, when you learn about the prophecy of the seventh generation, is that this generation of people that would be born 7 generations from when colonization would begin would lead us to a better place, than we've been, with all of the violence of the coming together of 2 different world and cosmo views, Western world and traditional Indigenous world. And, and that's where we're at. And I think that that's one of the fundamental things that we need to take away from, as far as lessons learned from Idle No More, is that the difference between Idle No More and other Indigenous social movements, say the American Indian movement or the Red Power movement, the 70s and the 80s, is that this particular moment in time, this movement came from our women. When we look at this time of extremes, this polarized landscape that we're organizing in as activists, as community members, as concerned citizens, there is tremendous violence happening in our society. We see it manifesting every day in the Native community with the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls issues. We see it every day manifesting and spreading through the violence against the sacredness of our Mother Earth through Canada's extractive industries-based economy. And I think that there's a important link that you all need to take away from this experience that Leadnow has helped you to have access to, and that is that our movement today is fundamentally led by Indigenous women. Every community that you go to across Turtle Island, whether it's fights against a toxic oil refinery, whether it's fights against the expansion of the Alberta tar sands or the half a dozen or so mega pipelines that are coming out of it, fights against mining expansion. We're in a mining renaissance here in Canada where mining is exploding, uranium, gold, coal, all across the provinces in the Arctic regions. Whether it's against offshore oil and gas development in our Arctic or in Newfoundland, we see our Indigenous sisters, our Indigenous mothers, our Gookums, our grandmothers are the ones that are holding the line. And I think it's important that we recognize that, and I think it's important that we understand that Idle No More came from a place of that sacred feminine creative principle. And I fundamentally believe in my soul, in my heart, that that's really where we need to look to for how to set things right, because things are incredibly imbalanced right now. And I really truly believe that we need to start organizing our movement from that same place that Idle No More was birthed from that sacred feminine creative place. Because I think that if we look at social movements from the past, where whether it's Indigenous peoples or the Black Panthers, African American social movements or whatever, from the civil rights movement history lessons that we can learn from. Trying to organize, tit for tat in a counterintelligence framework against the settler colonial states, mimicking the way that they oppress us to fight them, it doesn't work. But I think that if we come from a place, where we organize our discussions about economy, about politics, about, social interaction and our social systems, of how we organize our communities, and also our spiritual systems, the way that we conduct ourselves, their spiritual protocols, that's a very important, lesson to take away as well. Because I think that, Native people are not, just a page in a history book. We're not stuck in time. We're incredibly diverse, and we morph and adapt to our environment. And our entire traditional ecological knowledge base is fundamentally based on the observation of the ecology, the place where Creator put us as peoples, the observation of that place for thousands of years. And, that we carry within our languages, which are quickly disappearing, mind you, many of our unique languages, we carry an incredible gift in terms of how to coexist within the sacred circle of life, as part of that sacred circle, not above it, not dominating it and controlling it. And I think that that's something that's really important, that you all take away, is that Indigenous peoples are also always forever changing, and there is no pan-Aboriginal solution to address all of the diverse problems that Indigenous peoples face across the country. So the activist in Toronto who's done some solidarity work with Six Nations, you really shouldn't apply that experience with that particular group with, say, First Nations in BC. And the solidarity activist from Edmonton who's doing work with Beaver Lake or Athabasca Chippewa First Nations shouldn't do that to, the situation going on in Mi'kmaq territory with Elsipogtog and the fight against fracking over there. There are incredibly diverse, things that differentiate First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people across this country. There are also some shared things, though, from a strategic and tactical purpose that we can, grasp onto and utilize as far as where we exist right now in the political context. One thing that Harper has quickened with his omnibus bill super law agenda, by stripping away every participatory democratic mechanism within the Canadian democracy, the one area that he hasn't been able to strip away has been, the constitutionally protected treaty rights and inherent rights of Indigenous peoples. And the only difference for us between now and before Harper is that, we're still doing what we've always done, defending our sovereignty, taking account to what has been stolen from our territories that we're taking care of for the future, and working to undo the harm that colonization and occupation have done to our children. But in the last 40 years, there has not been one major environmental victory won in this country without First Nations peoples at the helm. And I think that the difference between now and the last 40 years is that other social movement sectors are now really dependent on Indigenous peoples to keep doing what we're doing, to particularly stand up against the agenda of multinational oil companies and mining companies that are operating here in Canada and that are writing the very super laws like Omnibus Bill C-45 that went through last year. The Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers wrote all the provisions that gutted the Navigable Waters Act. Greenpeace exposed that through a Freedom of Information request last year. There is a revolving door between these corporations and the federal government of Canada. And it's important that we recognize that Indigenous peoples now, more than ever, must lead the movement towards a new economic paradigm in this country, not only because of our traditional ecological knowledge base and our understanding how to take care of these lands that they call Canada, but also because we have the only strategic and tactical framework that has any legal teeth left within, Canada's common law system to actually, stand up against the agenda of big oil and big mining lobby efforts. And I think that, on the eve of the federal election, there's a lot of promises that are being put out right now, by the Trudeau Liberal Party, by Montclair and his NDP, by the Harper government. And it's important that we organize ourselves in a way that is not locked in an electoral cycle. Our problems are fundamentally rooted in our economic paradigm. A paradigm that says it's okay to sacrifice Crystal Layman's community at the altar of economics for the benefit of shareholders living thousands of kilometers away. And this is just ludicrous and ridiculous, especially in the context of this era of climate change that we're living in. And so, as solidarity activists wanting to work in solidarity with Indigenous peoples, it's important that we have to focus in and organize ourselves in a way that disrupts commerce. We need to throw a wrench into the machine. We need to be able to demonstrate the ability to stop business as usual in the Canadian economy. We need to scare away international investment, and if international investment is coming in, it needs to be done in a way that respects the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous nations here in this settler colonial state of Canada. And they need to acquire that consent from First Nations peoples if they're going to do any kind of investing or development in First Nations peoples' disputed lands here in Canada. And it's a real tragedy that the government ratified the bilateral free trade agreement with China, even though the Nuu-chah-nulth in BC, or sorry, I always forget how to pronounce their nation, Havasupath. Anyway, there's a First Nation in BC from Vancouver Island that is, right now in the courts of Canada challenging the bilateral free trade agreement with China, and Harper still went ahead and ratified it in an illegal way. So I think that, it's important that we understand that, the tar sands and the Energy East and Keystone XL pipeline are very visible campaigns that everybody wants to get involved in. There is environmental justice struggles in virtually every corner, coast to coast to coast in this country, that Indigenous solidarity groups need to support. And Canada's economic paradigm is fundamentally based on the Aboriginal suffrage industry. And in other words, 29 cents of every dollar is paid out in our gross domestic product is based on the ongoing dispossession, oppression, and suppression of Indigenous people's rights. And so it's important that we plug into new and exciting campaigns that are emerging, like the fossil fuel divestment campaign, which I do believe will eventually lead us in a place where we can finally target the Canadian pension plan and get them to divest out of companies like Petro-Canada, Suncor, our biggest energy company in this country. And we need to find, not solve racism, classism, and sexism, and homophobia. But I do think that we need to strongly develop the mechanisms and arm our movements with the tools to address those systems of oppression when they pop up in our coalitions, so that our coalitions don't fall apart. And I think that, again, going back to the economic piece, if we don't impact business as usual, like Idle No More did last year, when we stopped every single train in Canada's biggest economy in the province of Ontario with only one arrest, including 6 U.S. bridge closures, 6 U.S. border crossings. That was an incredible demonstration of people power. And I do believe that the social movement partnership of the 21st century is will be when social movements like the Quebec Student Social Movement, organized labor, and First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people get together and have our own conversation free without the private sector and the government's meddling about the economy that we want to see for our children's future. And I strongly encourage you to check out idlenomore.ca, check out the global fossil fuel divestment campaign, and please do learn about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the good work that's been happening all across the country, trying to work towards Canada, the settler colonial state of Canada, reconciling with its controversial colonial past. Oh, and follow me on Twitter, Cree Clayton. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Clayton. So all of these resources will be compiling all of these mentions of great books and websites and movements and Twitter handles and all of that to follow are things we'll be compiling onto our the Skills for Solidarity site along with this module. And so by all means, feel free to check that out in the days to come. So we've got about 15 minutes left, and I think we had there's been some great conversations going on, like I said, in Twitter, here amongst the panelists. Those of you at home can't see, but we've got a side chat that we've all been participating in and learning from and commenting on, and that's been really awesome to see as well as from our inbox. So I think we'll see how far we get. We might just have time for this one question, but from David in our inbox, he's asked, I think he was inspired, as many of us were, from the lovely post-it that Jess held up. But could you share any advice that you've received from elders or mentors that you hold on to as you walk this path? We'll let each of you speak. And Jess, if you have another sort of nugget of wisdom that you'd like to share in addition to one you already have, then that is more than welcome. I think we'll start with Lynn. We'll sort of go in order of the speakers. So I'll repeat the question again. Could you share any advice that you have received from elders or mentors that you hold on to as you walk this path? So we'll start with Lynn.
Sure. I think, of course, my favorite one is Chigawing. Why is it not coming to me? It's the idea of Debwaywen and truth, and where is truth located? There's a teaching that truth is both in one's mind and in one's heart. It's holistic. A lot of people have a hard time. What does that really mean in a concrete sense? I think it's Chigawing. How do I say it? I can't find it. It's I think the best example I can say about that is that what is wrong with me? A lot of people will say that they understand racism in an academic sense, that they understand all the constructs and all the theories and all the theorists, and but then what they'll say is they'll say they thought they knew everything there was to know about racism, but it wasn't until they were in a situation where they were a minority and they could feel the racism in their heart, that was when they really understood what racism means. They had an intellectual and a heartfelt understanding of racism. So that's given a concrete example of truth being holistic. A lot of people need a concrete example. So that's called Debwaywen Mikan Chichigawing, and it's a traditional Anishinaabe teaching that talks about truth as being both heartfelt and mindfelt. And that's also the methodology. I developed it into a methodology, and I used that to do my doctoral dissertation on the Algonquin land claims and self-government process. So, and my book is called The Truth That Wampum Tells, my Debwaywen on the Algonquin land claims process, and Debwaywen means a truth that is rooted in one's heart. So oftentimes what an elder will say to people when you give them knowledge, or when you explain knowledge, an elder will say, is that knowledge rooted in your heart? And if you can't say yes, then they really doubt that it's a truth. So I think that's a really important, powerful teaching. I talk a lot about heart knowledge in all the work I do. Make much for asking.
Excellent. Thank you, Lynn. Jess?
Hello? Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I was on mute. Thanks, Lynn, for sharing that. When I think about advice, I think the best advice that I've really been receiving lately is that from my peers and from other young people. I'm in the process of, trying to find a way to connect back to my community and to do things like get to spend some time with elders and stuff like that. And it's been really young people from my community and other First Nation communities in this area who have been really warm and welcoming and helping me to do that. So I'd like to say that the best advice that I've gotten that I can share comes from my sister Candace, and she spoke on the last panel here, and that is to laugh, to find time to find some humor in the work that you're doing, because oftentimes we can get really deep within ourselves and the negativity that we might find being directed at us in the work that we do. So laughing is a good thing. Like, for example, the time that I forgot the fourth R in the 4Rs youth movement. So that's the advice that I'd like to give everyone from my peers.
Great. Thanks, Jess. Over to you, Crystal.
Okay. Hopefully I don't cut out because everybody was cutting out. And this is really important. Ask this question, and I'm going to share it in the best way that I know how. But it's actually 3 different pieces of knowledge that's been passed on to me as, a young woman, a young Indigenous. Know all too well those systemic and cyclical abuses and come from that. And so lost my mother when I was really young, and to cirrhosis of the liver. And my grandmother raised me. So I was raised around my extended family. So, the 3 pieces that I think about is, our elders, they tell intentions. Our Creator will never leave you vulnerable. He's going to test you, and there's going to be trials and tribulations, but He'll never leave you vulnerable. And and through that, I that's why I hold on to the teaching in truth, and that teaching being there's one thing that all of us in this movement have. There's one thing that we have that industry and government will never have, and that's the ability to tell the truth. And so, within that, the ability to tell the truth is the ability to talk openly and honestly. So we talk about Mother Earth, and Mother Earth being our one true mother. And so that as long as we have our Mother Earth, we'll always have a mom. For she has those life-giving abilities. And so, I hang on to all 3 of those pieces as an Indigenous woman, and I think just as a woman and as a mother who's given life as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Crystal. And last word to you, Clayton.
Yeah, my brother is our Sundance chief at our family Sundance in northern Saskatchewan, in Peter Ballantine First Nation, well, north of there on this river called Mukuman River. And he was in Ottawa for the People's Social Forum. He was one of the elders they brought in, although he's not an elder. I mean, he's a young guy, but yeah, I don't think you need to be old to be an elder. I think you just need to have wisdom. And one of the things that we talked about, well, that he talked about with me, we were talking about the fact that our community back home in Pugatawagan is being courted by multinational gold mining companies. They want to build the world's biggest gold mine, in our home territory of Pugatawagan. And there's already gold mining companies that we're in litigation with, Hud Bay Gold Mining Company, already operating illegally in our territory. And so it's a very divisive issue because people, the socioeconomic conditions in our community are very bad. And multinational corporations, they exploit those socioeconomic conditions in collaboration and collusion with provincial governments who hold jurisdiction over our territory. And so my brother, he's a very humble man, and he said to me, we're sitting up late at my kitchen table that I'm sitting at right now, and he said, we got to do something about the greed. The greed is a sickness, that is got everybody sick, and it keeps them from connecting to the sacred, to what really means something, what's really important. And I don't know, it wasn't the most eloquent thing or like, this big, kind of Chief Dan George caliber teaching, but, just the simplicity of him saying, in that word, that English word, greed, it's a big issue that we're all dealing with right now, and I think that it's fundamentally rooted in the fact that our relationship, our connection, to our most sacred mother, Mother Earth, has been really affected by this hyper-individualism of consumerism. And I think that, we need to really fundamentally organize around, this issue of capitalism, because tar sands and pipelines and even climate change, those are symptoms of the actual problem. The problem, Naomi Klein writes about it very well in her new book. The problem is capitalism. And so, that was a dope teaching my brother dropped on me the other day, that things are going to get a lot worse. People are sick with the greed, and we need to, love each other and support each other in a good way to get away from that greed.
Thanks, Clayton. What a powerful message. What a powerful note to finish off on. I would like to thank everyone again for joining us this evening, everyone who's been following along at home, everyone who has organized among their friends and colleagues to set up viewing parties. It's been an amazing ride through these past 5 panels, and for those of you who missed any of them, as I said off the top, they are available online for you to watch and to share. This is the final Skills for Solidarity panel, and as you might remember, those of us who've been with us from the start, we always said that this program would be successful if it left us with more questions than answers. So we really hope that all of you are walking away with a ton of resources, a ton of questions, and lots of examples as well to begin what we've heard and know to be true is a lifelong process of doing this work. This program is funded by small monthly donations from our community, for which we're incredibly grateful. Many hands make light work, and many small donations make wonderful, great programs like this possible. So if you found the program interesting and want to support our ability to provide future learning opportunities like this, you can contribute at www.Leadnow.ca/donate. And finally, just in terms of next steps, so the panels and the workbooks will remain on the Skills for Solidarity website, and the discussion forum is active, so feel free to jump in there and participate. We'll invite all of our panelists to jump in and participate as well in as much as they are able, given their busy schedules, but the forum is active, and so additional questions and conversations amongst all of us can take place there. We are in the process of trying to figure out what comes next for Skills for Solidarity. We do have a team of volunteers led by Maya who are transcribing the videos, as I said, over the next couple of weeks. And we're going to be asking for your input on where we can take some of these next steps. So please keep an eye on your inbox, as your feedback and impressions of this program are really important for us moving forward. Finally, we've heard from lots of people who have been sharing portions of the Skills for Solidarity videos and workbook content with their community organizations and classrooms. And so if the program feels useful to you, please let us know and feel free to use it. I believe it's all licensed under Creative Commons attribution something or other license. That information is available on the website. So when you look to share it, all that information is there for you. So there are dozens, I think we counted over 70 people who have been contributors, advisors, volunteers, and made just amazing efforts to have this program take place, and we wanted to thank all of them. Their names will appear on the website as well, and yeah, we're just really, really grateful. We're grateful to all of our panelists tonight, all of the panelists who have joined us over the program, and all of you who have been watching at home. So thanks for spending your time with us this evening, and good night.